Just to be confusing. Yeah, so that's on.
Testing, testing.
Yeah.
And they were.
But
Okay. Good morning. We are live in 5, 4, 1.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Work Session on Monday, February 3rd, 2025. This is the first time that we're in this room. It's supposedly only going to be for a couple months. A lot of supposedlys don't always work on time, but because of the renovations of this building, parts of this building, we're in this room and live streamed. Today, we actually have two topics on the agenda, which really are sort of a blending of two. The first one is the briefing on the Police Accountability Board. The second is the update on the Police Accountability Board complaint data tracking. They're combined and they're shared in the same informational packet, and I know Ms. Farag will explain that shortly. As we begin, I'd like to thank Ms. Susan Farag for preparing the staff report for both topics and for once again and always assembling a most informative packet for us. And unless the committee members have anything to say, I'm going to ask the panel to please introduce themselves, ask if they have any opening comments, and then turn to Ms. Farag for her to lead us through the packet. I've been told that we have to continually cut off the mics as we go, so I'm going to cut my mic off.
Testing, testing. Probably, I would think so. Just gonna try this one again.
Well, you were the first technical difficulties you had. Congratulations.
Now we're over it, and the music game begins.
Yeah, congratulations.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Bishop Walker, Paul Walker, Chairman of the Police Accountability Board. Just a quick opening statement. I'm proud to have worked with the Police Accountability Board, or what it has accomplished since its inception in 2022 and its continued functionality in 2024. We laid a foundation for future members of the board. The county executive charged me with leading the board and creating a collaborative atmosphere that would foster and maintain a healthy, consistent team effort. I'd embrace this charge by framing our responsibility and the complex field in which it must execute them as painting a moving train. As members of the board, we grew together, learned from one another, and became a functioning body with a unified vision. We continually review our commitment to our mandate, to our individual responsibilities, to this community, which consists of residents and police officers alike, for we are one community. The board's duty is to review the outcomes of community complaints of police misconduct, such as racially biased policing and excessive use of force, and to recommend sound policies to improve police accountability. We embrace this mandate as a total process. We consider policies that might prevent future misconduct through improvements to the ways in which officers are hired and trained, to the policies that govern their conduct in the field, and to disciplinary process itself. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Forrest Gilman Riley. I'm the Administrative Director for the Police Accountability Board and Administrative Charging Committee in Montgomery County. I was excited to join this role in August of 2024. The principal work of the Police Accountability Board in 2024 was laid out in its annual report, and they focused on further developments and testing of the dashboard, as well as their work on reviewing the Freedom to Leave Act and consideration of consent searches. The board committed itself at its first meeting in January of 2025 to establishing a new ad hoc group directly responsible for reviewing the outcomes of disciplinary matters and trying to develop a consistent and common scheme for categorizing the information in complaints, particularly during this period of time where we don't have access to a fully developed case management system to track that information in an automatic fashion. I want to thank Ms. Farag for all the work that she did working with us over the last few months in preparing requests related to budget and preparing for this hearing.
We just need to please turn off your mic.
Good morning, Susan Farag, council staff. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm far away. Okay. And I also wanted to thank the Police Accountability Board and staff, Mr. Gilman Riley, have been very helpful, been very available for my myriad questions over the past several months. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the PAB ACC and go through the packet. As you know, there are 9 members on the Police Accountability Board and 5 on the Administrative Charging Committee. All positions are filled currently, and all members have completed their required training. The approved FY25 operating budget is about $788,000, and that pays for 2 full-time staff members, the salaries for the PAB and the ACC members, 2 independent counsel, and compensation for trial board members to attend training and sit on all trial boards. As Chair Katz mentioned earlier, there are 2 items that have been combined. I've combined them into one packet, and the reason I did that was if I had separated them, they would be very redundant in nature. So I'm just going to try to go through them a little more smoothly. Last year, there were some data discrepancies identified between PAB data and at least 3 of the law enforcement agencies. That included MCPD, Gaithersburg City, and the sheriff. Those disparities alone do not mean that there are any mistakes or irregularities. It just, we had not had time to get reconciled data during budget deliberations. So the council had requested that the PAB come back and explain that before the next budget cycle starts. As Bishop Walker also mentioned, the PAB issued its 2024 annual report, which was delivered to the council before December 31st. The ACC has authority over 7 law enforcement agencies in the county. They also accept complaints for the park police, although the park police is a by-county jurisdiction, so it goes to the state administrative charging committee. My focus over the past couple of years has been looking at the PAB and the ACC's staffing resources and their IT support and any other types of resources they need in order to fulfill their mission. It's a brand new disciplinary framework. The LEOBR, Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, was repealed. This is a brand new framework. Well, it's approaching 3 years, but you know, it has to be as transparent and accountable as policing itself. It has to be seen as legitimate both by the community members who want to file complaints, particularly for community members who have traditionally, historically distrusted police for a variety of legitimate reasons. But it also has to be viewed as legitimate for the police officers whose careers are also put at stake, basically, depending on the types of complaints that come in. So the 2024 annual report has a lot of information on Administrative Charging Committee decisions. According to their annual report, they received 120 complaints from December 2023 through November of 2024. During that time, they also issued 43 written opinions during the first 3 quarters of 2024. You will note that not every single month and time period matches up, and some of those 43 decisions that they issued were from complaints filed in previous years. So I just wanted to make that clear before I went on. The written opinions addressed a total of 130 allegations made against 67 police officers. Out of the 43 written opinions, the ACC issued 24 administrative charges in 12 of the complaints. That means of the adjudicated complaints, the ACC issued at least 1 charge in almost 28% of the complaints and against 22% of the officers. And there are charts on page 4 to show an outline of the complaint data. Also on page 5, there is a chart that shows the most common types of recommended discipline. Most common was a letter of reprimand, and they did recommend termination in 1 case. As I stated before, my major concern looking at both of these was identifying the needed resource needs so that they could fulfill their mission. Staff support is at the forefront. They currently have 1 administrative director and 1 senior executive administrative aide who support both the PAB and the ACC. I will note in some other larger jurisdictions like Prince George's County, each of those entities has its own staff. In addition to the assistance with data case management development, the county's TEBS, Technology Enterprise Business Solutions Agency, also provides integral operational support for broadcasting public meetings. The council added $200,000 to the FY25 operating budget for 2 independent council positions. 1 supports the PAB and 1 supports the ACC. One of the items that I had requested for this briefing was information on how many hours ACC and PAB members worked each week to help assess whether or not either or both of these entities needed to be able to devote more time to casework, or whether either entity needed more support staff to assist with operations. The PAB has advised that they don't systematically track or report their hours at this time, but they are open to surveying its members and tracking that information on a trial basis. That's something that we can talk about a little bit more in upcoming budget deliberations as well. In terms of complaint data tracking, as I stated before, there was an identified discrepancy in data between the PAB and at least 3 law enforcement agencies. As the PAB noted in its annual report, it is working on internal data tracking systems to develop robust data collection, tracking, and reporting capabilities. But this work is more complex than they initially thought because complaints can include multiple allegations, multiple officers, and even multiple agencies that are involved in one complaint. If City of Rockville and MCPD respond to the same incident, there may be complaints against more than one agency. And the varying scope and phasing and titling of the departmental policies, which are different, adds a further layer of complexity for their review. And one of the examples Mr. Gilman-Riley gave was that MCPD's policy on courtesy has a different range of conduct than Rockville City's policy on courtesy and human relations. So that adds more complexity. So even though TEBS has been working to try to develop a case management system, it may need to be more of a relational database than initially thought. And the PAB and staff have been looking more at whether or not it should be an in-house TEBS solution or whether or not there is an off-the-shelf case management system that might be more effective to help support the work that they're doing. The other concern with the data discrepancies is that while the PAB is required to transmit any complaints it receives to the relevant law enforcement agency within 3 days, there's no reciprocal requirement that law enforcement agencies do the same. So the law enforcement agencies in the county have been transmitting their complaint numbers on a regular basis, but it occurs monthly rather than within the same 3-day time period required of the PAB. And since the PAB doesn't yet have a data management system with full functionality, the data often must be manually counted, and that leaves room for delays in reconciling those complaint numbers. So as I mentioned, there are 2 different possible approaches to developing the data and case management systems that would best serve the board: an internal product developed by TEBS or the off-the-shelf case management system. And I did want to point out that the Governor's Office on Crime Control and Prevention recently contracted with the Police Executive Research Forum, or PERF, to conduct an implementation analysis of the Maryland Police Accountability Act. And that report highlights Caroline County's software implementation as a, quote, promising practice. The 5 law enforcement agencies there purchased the same complaint case management system, and that was done through a series of grants. And that allows complainants to file their complaints online through a single portal. Their county's Office of Law also purchased an iPad for each law enforcement agency to have on hand, so that if a community member would go to a police station to file that complaint, they would have private access to an online system, so they didn't have to go through an actual police officer. So the couple of things that I was looking at, in order to really provide the robust types of complaint information that the community and the council may be interested in seeing, I do think that a case management system is a really important next step. One of the concerns that I saw that made reporting, made any type of real analysis very challenging is that of the complainants who reported, there were about 18% of complainants who failed to report gender and 52% failed to report race. And that data gap makes it really difficult to do any type of racial equity analysis. When there's significant amounts of data that are unknown, the analysis becomes problematic. But I think the question really becomes, why are people not reporting? So if people still have skepticism in the system itself, and they are concerned that reporting their race or ethnicity or gender or what have you means that they will not get a fair hearing, that's a concern. And that's something that the multiple stakeholders here might want to investigate a little bit more, just to see if we can help improve that, the trust, basically the trust. In terms of staff report, this is definitely going to be a operating budget issue. The ACC reports that it takes approximately 17 days on average to review complaints in cases where the ACC does not need to ask for additional information from the police department. But for those cases where it asks for additional information from the law enforcement agency, case review can take approximately 79 days on average. So it would be helpful to better understand current case backlogs, whether these delays not necessarily delays, it might just be the nature of the beast, are coming from law enforcement agency, something outside like a concurrent criminal investigation, or resources within the Police Accountability Board and the Administrative Charging Committee. Because if it's within the Police Accountability Board and the ACC, and if additional staff support would help, then I think that's something definitely worth consideration during the upcoming budget. And while the PAB and the ACC structure within county government are intended to make it both of them as independent as possible, there may be some additional efficiencies and operational improvements available by using current county resources, such as data analysis assistance from county stat or another division within county government. Again, the caution there is to ensure as much independence as possible so they are as immune and shielded as possible from any political intervention at this time. And I have put some potential discussion questions down for your consideration on pages 8 and 9, and I'm also happy to answer any questions if you'd like.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everything that you have said and everything you have done. As we begin, I just want to very publicly thank the PAB, the police account. I always get concerned about that all we use in government is initials, but the Police Accountability Board and the ACC, the Charging Committee, for everything you've done and for everything you're doing. When the state, Bishop, I don't have to remind you, but when the state came back to Montgomery County and all places in the state said, you will be doing this, they weren't as clear on what you will be doing. We all knew that something was going to happen and should, but we didn't know exactly what the state wanted and what was going to be the best path forward. So therefore, it's the expression, flying the plane as we're building it. And that's what we've done. Some of it has been seamless and some of it has also been there. So we thank you for everything that you're doing and how you're doing it. I have often said for not just this topic, for many others, if we ask you to do the job, you need the resources to do the job. And in some cases, and it comes from our side, our being the county council side, that we don't always budget enough or the right things to do. We don't have all the money in the world, and we're not. And things get, well, we can wait for this one. And in some cases, maybe we can, and in some cases, maybe we can't. So I think in order, from the very beginning, when Ms. Farag has mentioned the case management system that is needed, I agree with that, obviously. I have a feeling my committee members are going to agree with that as well. The question is, what do we need and who decides what we need?
So the work that the board had put in directly last year and to an extent the year before in developing the initial complaint dashboard has created a pretty clear picture for us on staff from a procurement perspective of what type of data they would like to model and how they would like to model it. Now, that unfortunately did lead us to the conclusion that the current information storage infrastructure is not sufficient. It cannot model the type of information that is going to be useful to the board and ultimately to this committee and to the council in shaping policy. In discussion with the board and understanding what their objectives for data were, that gives us really two broad options. As Ms. Frog said, the in-house development working with TEBS or a product off the shelf. I spoke with representatives of the Police Accountability Board in Caroline County to talk to them more about their system using the software IA Pro is what they had deployed there. As I understand it, the Department of Police here has, at least to some level, also explored or deployed IA Pro. And I've reached out to try and set further discussion on that. That is a commercial product, fairly robust design for both corporate and public internal investigations, and so is seemingly well suited to tracking the type of information that would be sought here.
The problem with, and I'm glad you're doing research, Caroline County is very different than Montgomery County from just the number of agencies. I don't know, Caroline County doesn't have a county police force. They would have the sheriff and the state police, I guess. And the state wouldn't be under their jurisdiction, right? That would be under the state. So we need to compare apples to apples. Maybe that is the best system, but we do need to compare apples to apples. So that's one concern. I think we need to figure out as quickly as we can, because it should be for this budget, that we come back with answers for the tracking system. I would strongly suggest that. And I also know that because of the multiple agencies that we're dealing with, maybe Montgomery County has more police agencies in it than any other. Well, no, that's not true, because Prince George's County, every jurisdiction has 2 or 3 police forces in there, and they're my good friends. So I don't say that. I say that trying to be funny, but I don't know what they use and what they would be if they have a tracking system and how that would work. And with that, I'll turn it over to my committee member.
Thank you. And yeah, just to clarify, because Caroline County, of course, is very different than Montgomery County, but it does have the Caroline County Sheriff's Office is the equivalent to the Montgomery County Police Department in their structure, because that is the primary law enforcement agency for the county. And then they have smaller municipal departments like Ridgely, et cetera, that exist within their boundaries, just less of them than we have, and less mileage. And I thank you for pointing out all the many things related to data, and this is very helpful. It's challenging whenever you're doing something new to know how the factors are going to play out as they're collected, and what, we have, as noted, where people don't always write their full gender, or where they write an initial instead of, or where they don't put it at all. And I wondered a couple of things. One, where for the complaints where gender and demographic data have not been optimal, and recognizing that we don't currently have a system in place for going back and reconciling data that needed greater clarity. Did they tend to be in complaints where there were ultimately charges brought, or were there other things missing? Meaning, was the failure to include the demographic and or gender data something that was also akin to lack of overall information in the complaints, meaning then they didn't proceed any further? Or was the other information robust, they just did not include the demographic data? Do you recall? Oh, button, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can say that in all of the cases that the Administrative Charging Committee has considered and issued opinions in, that body had sufficient information to draw an appropriate conclusion in its discretion. The use or the inclusion or non-inclusion of demographic data, since it's not required to be all included as part of a statutorily sufficient complaint, that has the potential to affect the ability of the board to perform subsequent analysis of those decisions. But as far as we can tell, it has not impacted the ability of the committee to evaluate or issue charges.
Yeah, and just to add to that, in reference to what Forrester said, in reference to the board to be able to accurately, with pinpoint, visualization, look at these charges because of this dashboard incompletion. So it's very important, and one we've been pushing for, with tabs and working well, spearheaded by a board member, George Luedtke, really pushed this dashboard, worked very hard. You probably saw that in the report. But I think it's important to be able to track accurately ethnicity and different other informations in these complaints on the board side to help us find and research these trends. It's very important. I think we would definitely be doing a great service to the community if we can create something that helps the community track and we track as well.
Yes, and age too, right? Age being a big, like
Absolutely,
all the
absolutely.
many pieces.
All of these pieces. Yes.
And I note the phrase longitudinal was used in the packet, and I'd consider it at this point longitudinally aspirational, right? Because we're not that many years into it to do year over year data analysis, and especially as we make adjustments to figure that out. But in talking about, again, back to Caroline County and them having grants that they did and GoCap's comments, I was wondering whether, Governor's Office of Crime Control, what is it now? It changed. It is back to GoCap, but it stands for something different. So it's Governor's Office of Crime Control and Policy. There you go. All right. Whether they are going to, or has there been any discussion about setting standardization so that the state is giving the directive as to how best to do these things, and then the locals can put that into practice? Because again, you want to be able to capture things and knowing, as Ms. Frog pointed out, that certain agencies have different policies that have slight variations in them, but that can make the analysis somewhat different. At least if we had a standardized way of collecting all of the information across all of the jurisdictions, and, thinking ahead on that procurement side, if it is something that needs to be done outside of TEBS, putting it together, is there power in having a standardized solution that all of our jurisdictions use to help inform this work and the overall efficacy of having switched from the LEOBR process to the current one, and heighten that transparency across the board for all jurisdictions?
I'm sorry, what's that?
I just had one thing to add to that. There is no police accountability board at the state level. So there's no one entity making those types of statewide recommendations. I don't know if PERF is going to come back and look at that additionally, but I did want to point out, and maybe this is what Bishop Walker was going to say, and I'm going to cede to him. One of their main recommendations for the 2024 annual report was a standardized complaint form across all of our law
Right,
enforcement
right.
agencies. And I think that would make a really great foundation to start the process, at least here in the county.
Yeah, can I just?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that we have suggested, just adding one main across all the municipalities in Montgomery County. And I think if I was tracking, part of what you were saying as well, Councilman Luedtke, is within the state itself and all the counties, one of the things we did last year, if I'm tracking your question correctly, part of your question, is we did have a first meeting
Mhm.
with all chairs.
Yes.
And that was a productive meeting. I think something like that would help.
Yeah.
As well, meeting with the different chairs and the administrative directors or of those said organizations or PABs inside the
Right.
county. I think is, if I'm tracking right.
Yes,
I think
yes.
that is a great
You're-
idea to do that.
You were totally tracking it correctly. And I guess, and to Ms. Farag's point about there not being a state PAB oversight body, if you will, that's why I was sort of directing my commentary in the direction of GoCap, meaning as a policy advisory and also as the entity where a lot of grant pass-through funding, well, at least in more standard times, came through for these type of projects, that GoCap could be the sort of pusher and leader of both synthesizing things and also helping our local jurisdictions to attract that funding in order to make, help support that work and standardization.
Are you saying that the state police do not have a police accountability board?
There's an administrative charging committee, and they made it very clear in their last annual report that this is a major defect policy-wise moving forward, to be able to recommend better policing policy to all stakeholders.
So for just the state police, I'm not saying
No,
for,
it's any law enforcement agency that is subject to the state administrative charging committee, like Park Police,
Right.
DNR.
University Police
D-
Department.
Department of Natural Resources.
Does the
SBA.
state police have, if someone has a complaint, and not that I'm suggesting that, that we need, that they need to, but if someone has a complaint about a state trooper, what happens? They don't go,
State Administrative Charging Committee. There is a process in place. There's an infrastructure in place to do the complaint piece, and they report out on the complaint data. But there's no overarching body to make recommendations based on those trends that they're observing.
I did not realize that. Thank you.
I think my last questions were about the language on the forms and whether thus far from the complaints we've received and the types of where there might have been shortcomings or where maybe it wasn't always as clear as to what level of information was being sought. Have we done sort of a plain language analysis of the complaint forms to see where we might be able to break it down to make it easier for people to understand?
One of the things the PAP has done, and which was mentioned earlier before us, is we have broken into our ad hoc groups.
Mhm.
And one of the ad hoc groups is and has focused on the actual complaint form.
Right.
And one of the main focuses was language.
Okay, good.
And so I think that's something that's a workable or working document,
Okay.
and so I think we have improved on it. I think we mentioned it in our annual report. You probably saw something
Mhm.
referencing to that from last year's report to where and how we
Mhm.
improved it to this year. So it is on our radar. It is something we're creating. And I think also with going back to the dashboard, that part of it as well.
Right.
Being able to navigate and make it a lot more
Right.
friendlier.
Right. And I just, and Mr. Gilman Riley, you might know the answer to this. Do you know at what reading level the complaint form is set? Right? Because you like the goal is to try to have them at actually like an 8th grade or lower reading level. So it's really plain, direct language for government forms.
I'm not sure offhand if we have had it reviewed for a flesh cake grade level.
Mhm.
The form itself, if you access it through the Police Accountability Board portal, we'll take you through several pages of answering pretty specific prompts.
Mhm.
Ultimately, the thrust of the complaint is calling for the narrative itself of just asking people to describe what happened.
Right.
Which is sort of much in the same way that folks, when they go into, if a citizen wants to swear out charges before a commissioner, there is some basic information collected from them automatically, but the principal portion is simply the narrative.
And I'm wondering, if you could consult with any other organizations that have done significant work in the plain language arena, right? Like the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council, for example. I know they did a lot with the MVA and also with voting forms, just to sort of see what that is there something else that could be done in the narrative section to create prompts to assist that would help guide people as they are filling out the form, because one person might write 50 words, one person might write 300 words, but you want to try to give some context to help them understand what is helpful on the other end when you're receiving it. And legal forms, by very nature, most court forms, you're right, like if you're going in to get a peace order or something, they're not the most user-friendly. That's a long-standing challenge that we've had. But since this is a new thing, rather than going back and undoing old things, we have great opportunity to really push forward positively in making things truly, truly accessible. All right, thank you.
And it's got to be green.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. So I was taking a look at the website where people will go if they're going to fill out a complaint form. And it seems to me that there might be some simple upgrades here that could potentially improve our metrics. So when I click on launch PAB complaint form, then the page that comes up to me makes it look like at first glance, and also second in my case, that your only option is to print out the PAB form and submit or mail it to 101 Monroe Street. Now, it was then pointed out to me by my staffer who I texted that if you look on the right side of the screen in the margin area, there is a button that says next. And if you click on that button that says next, now you could fill out the complaint form online. But I would bet that there would be some number of people who are just getting to that page and being like, I'm not going to print and mail this. Don't click the next button, and we lose them right there. Also, for those who just do decide to go ahead and print and do the print and mail option, that form, let me pull that up again. That form under gender and race and ethnicity is not multiple choice. It's just a blank. And so I would bet that we're losing some number of people there who are just like, I don't feel like writing that out. Who might fill it in if there were checkboxes and, in another category as there is if you do the online form. But given that there are far more written complaints than online complaints, there might be some pattern there in terms of are the online complaints more likely to have the race and gender information? I would bet that they are, because then there's a drop-down menu. So maybe just adding checkboxes and a line for other for those categories might up our numbers there. And also making it much more clear that you're centering the online option, which is going to be most people's preference, and then having a button that says if you'd rather do it written, then you can do that as well. Now, I can certainly see why people might want some assistance filling it out, but this doesn't offer any assistance. It doesn't say, let's fill this out on paper so we can help you. It says print it out and mail it in. So, so that's a few suggestions. I would also suggest that, if there are folks who don't want to fill it out online or who might find that is challenging, or they're not sure what to include to the point of the conversation we've been having up here, it would be great to have an option to, for example, direct people to their local regional services office to fill it out with somebody there. You can seek assistance there, or, if there's other suggestions, we could put that also, but the regional services seems like kind of a natural way to go. We could add in county council members. Obviously, we just want more points of contact, and we're all going to get them to the same place. But right now, it just says print and mail. So to me, I'm really focused on how we can get these numbers up in terms of the reporting of just overall numbers, how many are being reported, and also the race and gender information, because I think that's really key to us being able to identify some of the biggest issues that we want to be ironing out. And so I think that has got to be solved. We really have to prioritize that. Now, that's going to increase the number of cases, and which increases the need for a case management system and potentially more staff. But I think that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here for addressing some of these issues.
Thank you for pointing out the complaint form. On it says place of birth. I just looked at it too as she was discussing this. I listened to every word you have to say, by the way. But it says place of birth, and then it says United States or U.S. born or an immigrant, and then it says region of origin. And candidly, I didn't know what that meant. And it's the United States, Canada, Latin America. It's the region where someone was born, I guess, rather than where this happened, where this complaint would have taken place, the region for that. So I think though it's a big thing, it's a little thing to correct. I think it makes a big difference. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think also important to note, relevant to that for place of birth, that it is an option to say prefer not to say. So especially now, really important that folks know that that we as a county are not going to ask for their immigration status, and we are working to make sure that participating in all of our county services is is open and safe for everyone. So just for the record, you can choose prefer not to say. Okay. Wondering also, shifting gears, what information exactly does the PAB receive on each complaint? Do the members at any point along the process get to read the police department's internal investigation report? Do they get the body-worn cameras? Is that something that would come by default or that could be requested? Is it ever requested? If you could talk a little bit about the process and what's received, that'd be great.
Yes, so at the beginning of each new quarter, the members of the Police Accountability Board are given access to the original complaint and the written decision from the ACC. They are not given access to the investigative files. That does not appear to be something that they could legally have access to under the current formulation. That is our understanding and speaking with the Office of the County Attorney as well. However, the full original written complaint, whether that was filed through the Police Accountability Board's online portal or directly with the department by email or their written form, is given to the board members, as well as the full written opinion of the committee.
Okay, see, I'm wondering then what you're supposed to do with that really, because if the question is, if the part of the task here is to be oversight over the internal investigation that was done, but you don't have the same materials or even remotely close to it that they're working with, you just have their conclusion, then there is no way to analyze their process, which is kind of the point. And there is information in there that could be gotten through, through a public request for information. So, like body-worn camera, if somebody requests that, we provide that, generally speaking. So I would think that anything that could be requested by the public should be able, certainly legally at least, to be provided to this body, even if maybe that's not everything. Obviously, when they do an MPA request, some stuff gets redacted and so on. But wouldn't it make sense to just have, as a natural part of the process, redact whatever those things are and provide you those materials by default?
At least in our review, or in the staff's review, and in speaking with special counsel for the Administrative Charging Committee, it would not appear so. There's nothing about the Police Accountability Board as currently constructed that implies a direct oversight over their processes. The Administrative Charging Committee generates its own procedures and independently reviews complaints. But their ability to procure information from police and the police's in-turn response obligation to provide requested material that's relevant to the information operates a little bit differently than a normal public information request. The committee is bound by strict confidentiality provisions. So at least the interpretation is there is not a way for the committee to convey the content of the investigation to the board. They're only able to convey the outcome.
I'm still not understanding why, if there's material that could be MPIA'd by the public, why, if I could request that, if my neighbor could request that and get it, I still am not clear on why the PAB could not get it. And I would note that, we're looking for trends, but I would say one of the trend areas that we would benefit from the PAB looking at is a pattern between what the type of complaint is and what their findings are in terms of their internal invest. That's like one of the patterns that I think should be looking at. And, even if that's not made crystal clear, I would think that here in Montgomery County, we would be looking for ways to do the utmost, right?
And I can clarify.
Sure.
The board does
we'll
receive the effect of that, of not just, they receive the complaint, which has the civilian's original allegations.
Mm-hmm.
The written opinions of the Administrative Charging Committee review the allegations as provided to them by the police. So a person may describe a situation involving use of epithets, for example. That's going to tend to fall under a department of rule for courtesy under most circumstances. And so a description of what happened, of what the allegation is to have occurred, is included in the written decision, as well as generally the committee's reasoning for either finding that, yes, this complaint is founded and an administrative charge will issue, the officer was exonerated because they followed policy, or variably the complaint is unfounded because there's just not enough information that could be obtained to determine the veracity, or it's unfounded because the policy that is supposed to have been violated may not be inclusive or descriptive of the scenario that the committee was asked to review.
Sure, but in doing that internal investigation, they are looking at materials besides just the complaint, right? They might be looking at body worn camera or other materials. So those are the materials that I'm asking about.
Thank you again, Councilwoman. I'm walking within line between the ACC and the PAB, of course. I am a committee member of the ACC, so I don't want to speak to that side. I'll allow Flores to continue to speak to that. But on the PAB side, not necessarily an answer to your question, but just information, I think, in reference to the board's view on this very topic. We are currently discussing how we could obtain these type of pieces of information like BWCs. If it's something that's in the purview of the PAB, if it is, how, and we are in the middle of discussing that, we really think it is. But how, and would it make us custodians of those type of records and then open to an MPA from the public, which we don't want to get into answering those and being held in that frame of having these records now in our possession, which now, of course, a member of the public can request it from the PAB. So we're currently discussing that. We're really working on it with, again, special counsel to the PAB to see how and what, but it is something that we've been looking at. It is something that we really think would be helpful in our mandate and in researching and finding trends to be able to recommend, different policy recommendations to help improve on what we're doing. So not really an answer, but just to kind of give you an idea that we are as a PAB.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear that you have a position and that the position is that this would be useful. And I would strongly agree with that. And I will say that I've gotten a lot of comments over the last couple of years from the public that indicate that it's important to them as well. And so I don't want to spend too much time on any one topic, but this one is very important. And this has been a focus of our questions over the past, couple of years or whatever we're at now. And so that's why I want to make sure we get to a point of answer. So if you all could get back to us as soon as possible with clarity around if you're not able to get these things, why exactly? And it sounds like you're looking at kind of two different levels of could you receive and look at the body worn camera footage that is unredacted and, that could be, the public would not receive if they did an MPA request. That would be obviously useful for you, but there could be legal issues there. But there's also what would be provided to the public if there was an MPIA request. And I have yet to hear a reason that makes sense to me about why that could not be just provided to you all up front. You could do an MPIA for it yourself. And so why waste, which we're not doing. And so say, let's do that if you're not doing that at this point. Or I would hope that MCBD would work in partnership with you all and just provide that. So if we could get clarity on legally why that could not happen, given that you agree that it would be useful, that would be great.
Thank you. And again, we would look forward to getting back with you with that.
Perfect.
I don't know what that time frame would be, but we definitely look forward to getting back to you with our main
Appreciate it.
discussion.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Just try and help out with the things that Councilmember Mink was asking about. And of course, these are a public record. The question is, what of it is then otherwise able to be obtained by the public, right? And it may be different because for your purposes, it is being used for a specific thing. You have statutory duties and what have you, but then you are in fact receiving those records, and they are public records, being the first point in the analysis. What I have seen happen in other situations where different agencies have different things that then go to another entity, another public body for work, and dealing with the MPIA is creation of bylaws or some other process rule where they refer the requester back to the original custodian of records for processing. So to the extent that you're having a concern about the ACC or the PAB having to be become in the middle of MPIA requests that would otherwise could go directly to MCPD or one of the other departments. That has happened, at the state, because it was one of my clients that I advised this for. So that where you refer it back to the original custodian of records for handling. And then they can do whatever redactions may be necessary, because again, it's going to depend on who the requester is. Because if they are a person in interest, meaning in the footage, they have a different set of rights than those who are not, right? So that let them handle that, and then that takes that out of the purview of the PAB and the ACC.
And
Councilwoman, I'm sorry.
yeah, and I was just going to be very clear about the redacted video. Obviously, when body worn cameras came into existence, everyone was glad that they did that, but they have to be extremely careful on what we're seeing. If there's a child and we need to make certain that that child is not a part of that video, that they're protected. If someone is followed into the bathroom, you have to make certain. There's all of these issues that we didn't think about in the beginning. We wanted body worn cameras. We need body worn cameras. We're very glad we have body worn cameras, but we need to make certain that the redactions are what they are so that the public is protected as well. Interrupted you, Mr.
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to confirm that what Councilwoman Luedtke was saying. Forgive me, please.
You just called me Dawn.
Okay, Dawn. That it's a standard operating procedure that another entity that is receiving a MPIA can refer the requester back to the original agency?
Oh, I set that.
Custodial agency?
Yes, I set that up via bylaws for one agency and its body, because it was for the state's longitudinal data system center, which by its very nature collects data and has data transferred to it from a host of other state agencies. So if someone's seeking particular information that comes from one of those agencies, like let's say the State Department of Education, then the process was you'd fill out the request, but unless it crossed sectors or it involved what the data system had done with the data, it would go back to the originating agency, which body worn camera would fit into that bucket because it is from the original custodian part of the law enforcement agency's records.
And you said that's part of your bylaws that was written in that.
Yes.
Is that something that the PAB can have so we can share with
Yeah,
special counsel?
they're public. I'll give them to you. I'll
Thank you.
forward it over to you. Yep.
Solving problems. Here we go. Did we get clarity on the reason for the case backlogs, like where that's backing up and why from your perspective?
Could you clarify on backlog? So just to clarify, the ACC is up to date on the receipt of complaints and issuing decisions on complaints within its statutory requirements.
Ms. Farag.
I was trying to attempt to figure out whether or not there was a backlog and whether it could be expedited. Some police officers might be waiting months to hear back on an administrative recommendation. As far as discipline, some officers, if it's really egregious, may not be working. They may be on administrative leave. And we got the information on average of 17 days, I believe, if they didn't ask for additional information, and it averages 79 days. If they do ask for additional information from a law enforcement agency, which sounds reasonable, they have a year and a day to complete these. I just wanted to know, as they start getting additional cases, because MCPD became under their purview July 1st, 2023, are those cases building up? You know, is there going to be a continued backlog, a bigger and I shouldn't say backlog, but just
The
time
timeline.
process.
Processing,
I would
okay.
like to be able to recommend getting ahead of something like that before it happens, if it is a cause for concern.
Got it. All right.
Makes sense.
You want to speak to that? Thoughts on that as it stands, or is this just something to keep an eye on and come back to?
I think it is something for us to keep an eye on, come back to at this point.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I yield.
That'd be good. Remember, I couldn't my money. This, so Ms. Frog, are there anything else that we should be discussing from this packet?
The one thing that kind of bothers me a little bit is the fact that their annual report is due by December 31st. So it means that they can't do calendar year to calendar year comparisons. That is required by state law. I don't know if it requires a state law change or whether or not the county can just determine it's okay to report out the information through December 31st in a more timely basis after the first of the year. And the other option there, which is not my favorite, is going by fiscal year, because I don't think the community really likes to think in fiscal years.
Councilmember Luedtke.
So first, my question would be, what start and end dates are all the other jurisdictions using, right? Because if it's due by December 31st, some places do it where they end their data capture and what they put in November 30th, which is really weird, right? Because that definitely is not, if we think the July 1st to June 30th is odd, the public definitely doesn't think about it in terms of that. So again, it would be good to go back and say, that's fine if you want it by December 31st of every year. That's a common deadline in state statutes. So, but the question is keeping it consistent across all 24 jurisdictions so that they have the same start and end time. So you're comparing apples to apples and it's not confusing for the public. I know, other reports where they do it purely on the fiscal year. So even though the fiscal year has ended, the report comes out 6 months later, there's that lag time, but that is often the way they handle them.
So once we find out what others are doing, then I guess while we're doing that, we need to figure out if there can be, if others are doing, December 31st, that's fine. But if not, then we need to figure out whether we can do it, whether we need state law change or whether we can do it strictly through the county.
I've seen, when I'm looking at other jurisdictions, I've seen end dates at the end of November and I've seen them at the end of October. So there doesn't seem to be any uniformity. They're ending as close to the end of the calendar year as they can, but still allowing time to prepare their annual report. The State Administrative Charging Committee waited till March to file their 2023. They just, so theirs is by calendar year. I've not yet seen their 2024 annual report.
So if you could find out, or if there's going to be a change, how would we go about that change? Go ahead.
Sorry, one more question. Is there a reason, and this might be a larger conversation too that we could come back to, but I'll just put it out there, that the PAB couldn't report out anonymized, obviously, and with proper redactions as needed and so on, but more details of each complaint? Right now, everything is summarized, and that is useful in and of its own right for seeing patterns, especially once we increase our reporting of the demographic data. But there could be value as well in more details of the complaints being made public. Obviously, we would want to take care to be protecting people's privacy and all of those things. But there could be some benefits there as well. And so is that something that you all have thought about? Do we know what other jurisdictions do in that regard?
At least in my review of other jurisdictions, it does vary tremendously as to what they will report out about a complaint that has been adjudicated by the ACC. It's certainly a question that we can put to the special counsel of the Administrative Charging Committee, and likewise that we are scheduled to review with the Office of the County Attorney to the extent that it involves other departments like TEBS and procedures for protecting and reporting data.
Great, appreciate that. Yeah, I'd be really interested to know what is the most that's provided by any jurisdiction currently, which isn't to say that we couldn't be the most, but it would provide a helpful comparison. And then if there's a reason for us to not at least meet that. Thanks.
Anything else, Ms. Frank? Anything else from either of the gentlemen at the panel? Yeah.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very, very much for all that you do. And we sincerely, we in your line of work and candidly, sometimes in their line of work, you don't always get enough thanks. but we sincerely do appreciate it, and you're certainly doing a service for the community. And with that, we're going to adjourn. Thank you.